So welcome to this chat after the King's speech. It's really about sort of what do you think are the implications of the King's speech and of this new government for you? For me, just to kick things off and to simulate things, I don't directly work in campaigns at a campaign organization anymore. I'm sort of more external, but certainly if I remember the difference between the last Labour government and the Conservatives now back to Labour, it was certainly the last Labour government was much more positive on campaigning because in a sense, a number of people who are part of the campaigning forum community are now MPs. So some of them have come from us as a community and as not just the ECF, but as the wider community of campaigners. But also Labour would often ask and encourage, could you run a campaign on X? So for instance, Make Poverty History, for those of you who maybe weren't around back in 2004 or 5, was actually partly a conversation request by the UK government for the UK to campaign on that because they were hosting the G7 event and others. So for some of you who weren't around back then in terms of campaigning, you might find there's some surprises in actually not only is the government a bit more positive, but they may actually say, could you campaign on X, which is a little bit of a difference from perhaps the last government over the 14 years. And so there will be certainly some differences in approaches and things that are that might surprise many people. So with that in mind, of just a few of my thoughts that will hopefully stimulate yours, what are other thoughts out there about the King's speech and this new government that you have? You can either raise your hand or just unmute yourself. It's up to you.
I can kick off. So I'm Lizzie, I work at Child Poverty Action Group. So I suppose there wasn't anything I think particularly surprising in the King's speech. Excuse me. We were obviously hoping to see something on child poverty. There was something about child wellbeing in breakfast clubs, which we were expecting. But then after the King's speech, there was this commitment to a child poverty task force. So the timing of that was quite interesting.
Okay. So they didn't announce it in the King's speech, but they threw it in afterwards as a sort of an extra. And for any of the others who are sort of not on screen, perfectly fine. But as this is a chat and a conversation, seeing your face is lovely. So, but it's up to you. I'm not sort of.
I'm being very I'm Sophie Dodgen here from RNIB. I feel a bit slow on Zoom. I do so much stuff on Teams these days. I think there's this one thing which is about I'm quite old. I was around at the time of Make Poverty History and the start of the Labour government in '97. And I remember going to an Amnesty conference at the time where they said that for supporters it was all about how there was just more access, that there was a real step change in access when the Labour government took power in May '97. I think there's that question for us all, is access the same as influence? And I think that's the challenge there'll be a lot more good feeling, I think it's fair to say, for quite a lot of the issues we work on at RNIB. We're very pleased with Stephen Timms being appointed to be Minister for Social Security and Disabled People. He's got a lot of expertise, but yeah, having influence might be a slightly different matter. And of course, they've got some pretty tight purse strings, haven't they? So we all know that. So there's going to be still plenty to do, but we can do it with a different mindset.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, the access thing, sometimes you can get excited by the access you have and then not realizing that they're really just sort of keeping you involved to sort of sometimes to prevent you from making further progress and bigger steps that might put pressure from the outside.
And there could be a lot of consultations coming with all the things that are happening. There's going to be a lot of time taken up feeding into things, responding to things. Yeah, but still have to get all the power analysis done and to know that it's not just about evidence, it's all about power. So that's my
Absolutely,
feeling.
It's all about power. And yeah, Mike Harris, who's speaking next week, has said that the difference he's seen is, and the way he put it, I thought was really, really nice, is that it's very different campaigning to a government which is driven by a mission, which is what he calls Labour, versus is driven by politics, which is what he calls the Conservatives. And that he was saying, when I had a private conversation with him, he's going to say this publicly, so it's okay I say this, which is essentially that it might be harder at times with a government that's driven by a mission like Labour is right now because they already have a lot of their stuff in place and are really driving that through. And so to try and make some headway in that, you're really going to have to sort of make your points quite clear and sort of get them in there. So other people want to comment?
I was going to say what you just said.
Go ahead, Grace.
Sorry. I was going to say what you just said, Dwayne, that the because it's such a full docket, it felt like, oh, there's less room to be like, to put our hands up and be like, actually, we'd quite like this. And we talked about with our public affairs team, like, so I work for Parkinson's UK, and like it felt like there was less health stuff to like latch onto, but we do lots of stuff on benefits and disability and social security as well. But we were kind of thinking it was cool because we think we'll be able to do more bill work and amendments and try and tack things onto things, but that it seemed like there was less room, and that while like we've got good relationships with the governing party now, and we're going to be like building relationships and things like that, that it might be like tough for charities to try and set agendas or get in there. And we were also really interested to see how fast the House of Lords reform will go through, and whether they'll be as significant as they have been in the last like 15 years in terms of bending to the campaigners' will a little bit more, and jacking the government a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. It's sort of, yeah, it is a bit of a change of how you think about government if you use the last 14 years. A few new people join us as well. And just a reminder, this is a conversation rather than actually a presentation. So, you know, the question at the moment is sort of what have been first impressions of this government and the King's speech, and how you see it affecting you going forward.
I can jump in. Yeah, just adding to kind of Grace's thoughts. Oh, sorry, I'm Yvonne. I work at Macmillan Cancer Support. Yes, there's like definitely less on health in there, but I don't think we'd really expected there to be a lot on health. But we were kind of pleased to see like the NHS, you know, recognised as that it should be a service for all. And that kind of specific point around the waiting times, which are so very poor across the 4 UK nations now. And we've kind of talked a lot about how we kind of pivot our messaging now, remembering that we're not holding the previous government of 15 years standing, you know, to accounts, but that we do have to give kind of some space for like the development and of plans and those plans to get going, and really kind of like thinking now about how we can kind of pivot our messaging and how we can kind of present solutions and work as partners with the government on those instead. I think something an old manager of mine used to say was it can be just as hard working with a more friendly government as maybe a more skeptical one, because yes, they're on your side, yes, they recognize there's a problem, yes, they're going to do everything they can to fix it, and kind of recognizing the circumstances that this government is coming into, you know, economically and kind of all round being much worse than the previous Labour government came into. I think is also something that we're conscious of, like the scale of the challenge and the number of things that need fixing is so much greater, and there is, you know, so there will be kind of so many voices needing to speak out, but they're not being there being a very full bandwidth on that, and I think, yeah, one of the challenges is that it's been really positive, I think, to see you know, things like the new Council of Nations and Regions and kind of that promotion of collaboration. You know, we kind of feel hopeful that I think Grace and maybe Lizzie said, you know, there's that different mindsets, you know, things will be done in a different way, and that there's that room for collaboration. But the funding, so there are so many holes of billions of pounds in so many budgets, that yeah, that's probably that. We often have to ask for funding for plans to be fully funded, and I think that will remain like a really big challenge.
Yeah, absolutely.
One thing I've noticed, so I'm Rosemary. I work as an advocacy consultant and facilitator these days. So not on one specific topic or anything, but something I've noticed is this shift in narrative, and I'm hoping that the kind of indications around we're not going to engage in culture wars, etc., means we're really going to see a shift away from the delegitimizing of any of our campaigns and our ideas, because I think that's been really prominent over the last few years, that if you campaign or are active on things that are seen as contentious, that your ideas even aren't legitimate and you don't have a place in these conversations. And my hope is that what we're seeing now means that at least we're not going to have that. But going to Sophie's point about consultation, I think there's potentially a risk that as we get more access, that we start as campaigners, I guess, monitoring ourselves or restricting ourselves out of fear of risking our newly found access. And I think that would be a real shame if we lost a lot of the outspokenness that we've been developing as coalitions, many of us, over the last few years.
Yeah, I'd absolutely sort of say that is a huge risk. That whole insider-outsider model of campaigning, which most of us sort of work on, to have both a foot inside and outside the door. I've seen a number of organizations get that horribly wrong, and their external campaigning is so weak as to be almost useless, because they didn't want to risk the insider sort of relationships. And as a result, they got nothing done either way, because they had no credible risk outside to put pressure on sort of banging down the door. At the same time, they were sort of accepting the assurances without any evidence sort of internally as they sort of dealt with people face to face. Yeah, sorry. Yep, James.
Sorry, hi, I'm James. I work for Kinship. I say I'm struggling to say that because I've only just started a few weeks ago, mid general election campaign, which, you know, great time to start. But what you're saying about the kind of insider outsider thing really resonates, because we were really lucky that one of the junior ministers chose us as her first official visit. So she came and met with some Kinship carers, which is amazing and obviously a fantastic boost to the campaign. But internally, I feel like we're doing this sort of job of expectation management, because I think it's almost too good for some people. They think, oh, great, cool, so that's that done. Our campaign's in the bag, you know, give it 6 months, it'll be all done. And it's like, well, I think we're, and I think it's key to just listen to what the minister was saying, was basically, we're here to listen. The minister didn't come and say anything, you know, didn't promise anything, didn't give us anything, didn't indicate anything, but was listening. And I think, yeah, that internal expectation management is a big part of what we're suddenly having to do, which we didn't expect to have to do. We were thinking we were having to go in kind of pushing our issue up the agenda. So suddenly we've had to pivot round. We're also going to be focusing more on the ministers and making that more of our campaign, and maybe not less, I guess, maybe kind of evening that up with, alongside engagement with MPs, particularly through Kinship carers themselves in constituency. So I don't know, I feel like there's going to be pivots. We've already had to pivot quite quickly, but I can already foresee other pivots coming down the road as they suddenly go quiet on us and they don't return our calls, or they don't want to come and have a visit with us because they've ticked that box off, or whatever it might be. Yeah, so I'm going into the summer ready for a busy one. Most summers it's like, okay, we can sort of relax. I know we always say that and it never is relaxing, but at least there's that mindset. This year it feels like, I don't know, my phone's going to be on all the time, which is sad. And actually, someone mentioned that an MP at an event a couple of days ago said that no one should be taking any leave this summer, which I think there was a few uttered remarks in the audience. But I think maybe that's the mentality of Labour, that they're just going to get on with it and they want to go. They're not having a holiday this summer, so we're going to have to be there too.
Yeah, and I was having a conversation with Martin, who's on the call, sort of just about an hour ago, and he was like, are they actually going on leave? And so the Parliament will recess, but actually, the rumblings I've heard is that they will be working through the summer. I mean, it may mean they go off a little bit on holiday here or there, but actually, I think the expectation is sort of, and I wonder if that's your expectation as well for all of you, is that sort of there is a lot of work they'll be doing over the summer, which means it's key influencing time, unlike most years.
Mm. Yeah, it'd be interesting to know if that's true across different departments. We work particularly with Department for Education, so that feels like the vibe coming from there, but it'd be interesting to know if that's different in different departments.
That's a strategic pause for me for someone else to jump in if they wish to say it.
Hi, I'm Jay. I'm from the Woodland Trust. Like James, I just started with the trust a few weeks ago, so fairly fresh. And I have to say, I was traveling back from Bolton yesterday, so I wasn't able to actually catch the King's speech itself. So I'm doing a bit of catch up on that as we speak. So I think just echoing what other people have been saying, we're very keen to just sort of try and stay in the room with the government and Labour. We're in a very fortunate position where we're sort of already in the room with a lot of people. So we're just sort of working on maintaining and building a good rapport, because if doors closed and we're out, we're not going to have that influence. And my prior experience in other places working with Labour is when you get shut out the door, out the room, you're out the room and you have no influence. So it's very important to keep on friendly terms with them, from what I've experienced previously. So obviously from our point of view, we're sort of advocating woodlands, ancient veteran trees, ancient woodlands. So we're sort of watching very carefully the planning reforms coming through, the big infrastructure projects, seeing what that's going to mean. So for us, I think it's very important to very much be on the level with the new ministers, etc., and just be in a friendly place with them where we can work with them.
Yeah, my experience with the last Labour government sort of was that there wasn't as much vindictiveness, that if once you actually crossed a certain red line, sort of that you were out. There's certainly where I can remember some people like that for sure. Can think of some ex-Home Office ministers, but certainly the Conservatives seem to have been much more sort of that style. It's like, stay on my good side or you'll never get back in again. I would hope that Labour and Lib Dems sort of they have always seemed to be a little bit more receptive to that give and take. But others' experience?
I should just come back and just say my experience previously of Labour was local government level rather than previous government. So whether that will be like that at national government, time will tell. But I think definitely an emphasis on, it's just good practice to have good relationships and rapport with people, isn't it? And just sort of stay in the room with them.
Absolutely. Now, Susie, you raised your hand.
I was going to say, yeah, old enough to have worked with the previous Labour government as well. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think my experience then was generally they weren't as sort of as vindictive and petty, but equally, I do remember being in a meeting in the Department of Health with Rosie Winston, I think, and she was very annoyed by another mental health charity at the time. But they just want a heads up. They don't want to be caught off on the back foot, I think, really. So I think my learning from last time working with Labour is, it's just polite to give people a heads up rather than they don't want to be surprised, really. I think they're definitely want to be sort of, helpful where they can, but probably don't surprise them with anything, because certainly in the last Labour government, that didn't go down very well, really. But equally, I think, they will be working on through some recess has been announced, but is much shorter. So I think, Parliament will be in recess from, a month from the end of July until the 2nd of September. But I suspect there will be a lot of work going on, and most MPs will be wanting to look busy, and most ministers will be wanting to look busy, really, because I think the clock is ticking on their first 100 days and their first 3 months and their first everything, so they're not really going to all, you know, disappear off for well, they've only got a month's holiday now rather than 6 weeks, but I think they are very much going to be wanting to crack on so that they can actually have ticked things off and have got some easy wins and some quick stuff done, you know, as soon as possible, really. So I think it's not going to be a very quiet public affairs summer this year.
Yeah. Good. Now I can start going down the list of questions, but if you have questions you want to ask each other, that's also perfectly legitimate.
I've got a quick one, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course.
Cool. So there's an ongoing piece of consultation about alcohol-free descriptors, which has actually been going on for a long time and was meant to complete last December, but then obviously didn't happen. And it's not a big piece of legislation. It's not big publicly. It might not even be legislation. They can keep current guidance. I don't know where to go with this now we've got a new minister, because it's been battered around so much with different health ministers. Where would you go if you've got something that isn't the biggest thing on the agenda, but has just been ongoing for 10, you know, years, and actually could do with it, would be a really quick decision, doesn't need any legislation? Stunned everyone into silence.
I think it's some reflection going on there. Anyone want to sort of respond to that? Susie?
Sorry, I don't know, trying to get a little hand thing. I was wondering, yeah, how you're, you know, you are making links with sort of civil servants as well on that. Because, yeah, I mean, I think if it's not going to take up parliamentary time and it's an easy win and they can see the benefit of it, really, I think you need to sell to them why it's important for them to do it. I think I wouldn't necessarily, you know, no government wants to come. Actually, I'd say no government wants to come in and do a thing that the other government was doing, but then they've just picked up 2 bills from Sunak. So maybe it is very much all changed. But yeah, I mean, I think I'd sell it as how easy it is, what the benefit will be, how you can help, and just try and reach out to civil servants as well as the minister, and get them to pick it up, really. Yeah, I mean, previously no government ever wanted to, you know, there was a strategy by the previous government, so they don't want to do a strategy, they want to do something different. But this government has very much, you know, thrown that rule book out by picking up 2 of Sunak's, you know, key bills and taking them forward in the King's Speech, which is pretty unheard of, really. So I think just sell it as, you know, how easy and what benefit will be and how you can help, really. But civil servants, I think, will be key in DH, and just make contact with some senior ones there, I reckon.
Yeah, I think it's because civil servants kept moving that this just hasn't been finished. It's a very boring piece of legislation. Anyway, thank you. Oh, if you didn't know, sorry, I'm Laura from Club Soda, and this is our shop with all the alcohol-free drinks in. There you are, come and visit.
Woohoo! Where is it?
Covent Garden, so we're opposite Freemasons Hall.
Okay.
Shop
great.
and bar, come for work drinks.
Great. I never even knew that existed, and I've interacted with you for years, so.
I know. Well, yeah, it's one of the many things that we do, but thank you.
Great. Other questions people have of each other, or sort of concerns they want to raise? So one of the questions up here, any key dates we should be looking out for? I mean, the ones I know off the top of my head, besides the recesses, is really the party conferences. Sort of, obviously you all know of those ones. Any others more specific dates that are coming up?
Does anyone have a sense of when the budget might be? Do we think immediately after conferences, more likely than before?
I was going to say, I'm not sure on dates, but yeah, things like the budget, the comprehensive spending review, I guess like the period before then being the influencing opportunity, but I'm not sure I've heard any dates yet.
And I think we're expecting a short spending review to tide us over, and then a longer one next year is what I've heard, but don't hold me to that.
Yeah. And yeah, for influencing a spending, if it's something, a review in late September, early October, then yeah, time's already ticking quite fast on that one. It might already be pre-written. It wouldn't surprise me. They've had 14 years to write it. Okay. How are other organizations? How will you be approaching and sort of prioritizing your engagement? Are you going for ministers? Are you going for MPs? Is there, you know, is it sort of new MPs, sort of experienced returning MPs? You know, are you prioritizing that? That's one of the questions up there. I'm extrapolating from what's been written, but
I think we are building kind of like a target list of ministers and MPs, but there are just so many new ones that we are trying to kind of remain open to finding out about them and hopefully bringing some of them on as champions in the Parliament as well. So
we've had a similar thing where we worked quite hard to I've been trying to focus more on our like local activists and make them feel comfortable engaging MPs. I think through the last few years we've had a lot of people say there's no point me contacting my MP, they're rubbish, they don't listen, like, you know, very feeling very disenfranchised. So we've been trying to like our whole approach in the general election was to like build confidence and esteem in our activists to feel more comfortable talking to MPs and hopefully maybe feel a bit more like hope with engagement. So I know that, you know, with some of our national stuff, we're going to like step back a little bit because it's a bit harsh to be like, you've not done this yet 2 weeks into the government, but and to engage like some of the more local stakeholders, but definitely like trying to rebuild relationships and, you know, rebuild our APPG and everything is a challenge. But I've been trying to focus more on like getting our community more involved and more comfortable and getting them to feel like maybe there's like maybe writing to your MP isn't useless, or maybe like going to visit your MP isn't useless like you might have felt it was before.
And that's interesting, Grace. You say you're mobilizing your community around that. So are you getting your supporters and your community to actually also do crowd research for you to find out which are the responsive ones? Are they interested in these issues? What is their existing position? You doing any of that?
Not in a scientific way, but with our volunteers, we try and figure out who are the useful people and who are the people who have, particularly for us, a connection to Parkinson's or a connection to the local community is another really key one, because we get a lot of stuff about like blue badges or benefits and stuff. And so if they've got experience in the local council and they know how things work, or if they've got a bit of like they've got a bit of, I was about to say swag, if they've got a bit of like gravitas in the local area, how they can like help us fix really localized problems, and then maybe be motivated to like speak on our behalf in Parliament or whatever. We've got a bit of a job to convince our community that like campaigning can achieve things. So we kind of want to show them in ways that they can like understand it, like if they hear someone say something or if they see something change. But yeah, we do get a bit of like intelligence, particularly from our really involved volunteers. They'll be able to tell us who knows what, and we've got a big like local group, like because we do support work as well. We've got loads of local groups, and so sometimes the local groups know a little bit more about whether the MP is in favour of certain things or hates the hospital or whatever.
Yeah, no, it's actually, and it's really interesting, Grace, that you said there's a lot of people who may not believe campaigning can actually work. And I think that may have been, for everybody here, an issue that people have been trained for the last 14 years that maybe campaigning doesn't work anymore. And so there may be a big job we all need to do in actually showing people, convincing people that actually there is hope, there is progress. You know, I mean, sort of, it's not that the Conservatives were opposed to sort of campaigning in the same way, but I think they approached it differently, and sort of they had different constituencies and priorities, whatever. So
it felt like we had to go around Parliament as a stakeholder. Like we started like going to councils and ICBs and other health bodies to try and like, because it was a bit like, oh, we're going to do as much as we can, not involving the government, which was unfortunate.
Yeah, but you have to do what you have to do, right? That's I always try to describe people who don't know much about campaigning as it's sort of like you have to sort of be like a toddler. You have to try everything again and again and again until you find something that works. And then as soon as it stops working, even though it did work before, you have to try something else. That is sort of that persistency to just keep on trying, no matter your sort of, and keep trying new things is something I can sort of relate with both campaigning and having seen toddlers try and get their way. With the toddler in that sense, obviously, which is maybe not so flattering, but I think the persistence model might be the one that's sort of encouraging.
I was going to say a lot of solidarity with everyone having to rebuild APPGs and networks and things. So at RNIB, Royal National Institute of Blind People, we had like 170 odd sort of parliamentary champions before the election was called. And of course, that's a bunch of them didn't stand again. A bunch of them have didn't keep their seats. We've got a bunch of people who are there, and there's about 26 who signed up during the election campaign who were new people. But then there's some people that were quite good allies of us who would book meeting rooms and things, who are now actually junior ministers, and they're really busy and they're not going to be able to do some of those extra jobs that they have done before. So there's a lot of rebuilding things, and yeah, just definitely feeling a sense of tiredness of like, oh God, got to get all these people back involved, got to make ourselves known to a load of people who we had some really good sort of profiling data coming through before the election, but of course we're starting from such a different base now. And we were running a campaign on access to vision rehabilitation, which is a really niche kind of unknown kind of area of social care support, and social care of course is very much missing from the national agenda at the moment, and it's the elephant in the room. So it's going to be a long old haul, and I always say we have to talk about stuff until we're really bored of it. I think a lot of my kind of time in campaigns over the last 20 years is seeing charities doing a lot more bits and pieces, a bit of this and a bit of that, and moving around a bit. And I started off at Christian Aid, where we did the same thing for 5 years and never did anything else. So I'm very used to that sort of, you really stick at something and you really focus on that mobilization and getting that message across really thoroughly over and over and over again. Yeah, it's a challenge when there's a lot of different issues that all matter, because you've got to really focus and think about the audience and how much they're really going to take away. If you talk about lots of different things to them, they won't really know which one it really matters. Yeah, they all matter, of course. There's lots of things to sort out.
Yeah. I mean, I remember the last Labour government they were very keen on coalitions. Basically, they viewed it, and it may have changed, and but they viewed it that if you can get together and agree something, it's much easier for me to agree to it, because I have to agree to one thing rather than 10 different organizations asking subtle differences on the same thing. So
definitely.
Just gonna ask Grace, have you been sort of using positive examples of campaigns that works as sort of just evidence to people that it does work, to sort of counter that sort of sense that campaigning doesn't work?
Yeah, we have, and we were lucky. We had a really well-timed campaign conference, just accidentally, that was in the middle of the general election, and we've had some like brilliant success this year on a national and a local level with like getting time critical medication into an NHS plan, and like getting nurses who are going to be made redundant or sacked like reinstated and things like that. So we've got some campaigners who absolutely love talking about it. So yeah, and that's been really reassuring to other people. And I think it's been quite inspiring. Like previously, some of our more experienced campaigners have maybe scared new people off because they're using a lot of jargon, and because we've had to get really technical with the health service, they've like new people come and they're like, I don't know what like this obscure thing is. Whereas I think now they're like, oh, actually, like me writing a letter works, or me reaching out works. So yeah, and that helped encourage people who maybe hadn't engaged before to write to even just candidates and say like, have you heard of Parkinson's, by the way?
That's really good. So in terms of what we're doing, sort of building relationships with government, it's a really sort of a question for our government affairs department, which overlaps with what I do. So what I do is interact with the public and the membership of the Woodland Trust, and sort of, I think you were saying, Grace, about sort of hanging fire a little bit, let them sort of settle in. So I've got stuff on file to call upon later on if we need to, but as far as like the membership and the public concern, we're kind of holding fire, not jumping down the throats, let them settle in a bit. And it's really our government affairs department that's like really engaging with new MPs and ministers and public servants stuff to build up that rapport. What we did do is we did a campaign during the election campaign where we got our membership and the public to contact the candidates, and based on what positive responses we got, we already have like a list of potential MPs who are sort of on our side. And then second stage with that, once they settle in, we're going to contact them again and say, hey, you said you were interested in trees. Would you really be interested in trees? So that's sort of where my work is at the minute. It's just sort of hanging fire a little bit and waiting for things to settle down. And then we'll, yeah, based on the conversations our other departments already having, building that rapport, then we'll go forward a bit more as time will tell how things pan out.
Absolutely. Other questions or comments you have sort of for each other or for sort of for the group? I do have a list of 32 questions here you asked, so you know, let's see. Anyone have any comments about how to work with first-time MPs and new staff? No comments on that?
I think
been a
we've been
while.
thinking about, sorry, Joanne. I think
Oh,
we've
go
been
ahead.
thinking about what we can offer them, sort of what's in it for them to meet with us. So I appreciate that may not be something that all organisations have, but we have a kind of a second tier advice service that caseworkers can use. We were thinking about kind of an education piece around universal credit, because that'll be something that constituents will be coming to their MPs about. So yeah, trying to sort of build a relationship, a sort of mutual, you know, relationship in that way.
Yeah. Miriam, do you have your hand up or?
Yeah, so I was just going to say, I think it's always a bit of sympathy for the new MP around not having an office and not necessarily having staff for a period of time. Obviously, once MPs are in full swing, their staff clear out most of that inbox for them. So, yeah, just not being too upset if they don't respond straight away whilst they're not yet there. And equally, if you work in anything where they're working with constituents directly, like, so for example, I work with deaf young people, we are looking at doing something to support them with like how to deal with casework for deaf people, like some guidance on that. So like how to do that for your surgeries and things like that. So now is the time to train them up to do those things, or like start getting that stuff ready to send to them. But yeah, I think sympathy is probably the main one.
Right. How are you guys dealing with the sort of the now opposition parties, both Conservatives, the Lib Dems had obviously huge growth, you know, obviously reformed it as well, and the Greens, sort of how are you engaging? Are you engaging with any of them now, sort of thinking about going forward, how they can be sort of allies, sort of, because they're likely less busy than they were?
This has been a question that's been bubbling in my brain, and it's still one I need to ask internally. So I don't have an answer on that outside of the fact that I assume we had some positive responses from some of the other parties on our public engagement campaign, and that we'll be engaging them in the future. We do run a cross-party group in Parliament already, which will involve some of them. So outside of that, I can't really answer anymore, but it's definitely one that immediately popped into my brain after the election. How are we going to engage the opposition? So if we come to this discussion in the near future at another Zoom, then maybe I'll be able to fill in more. But yeah, it's definitely a good question to ask.
I did book myself a ticket to Brighton for the Lib Dem conference the day after the election results came out, because I thought, yeah, there's going to be a lot more Lib Dems, so better go to Brighton this year. I'm assuming unexciting on the Lib Dem front that previously they had so few MPs, they all had, you know, those on the front bench had 5 responsibilities each. So I'm hoping that we might at least, yeah, well, they've got enough to divvy round, which I'm not sure they have fully done yet, but this does excitingly mean we will probably actually have a science spokesperson for Lib Dems that we can engage with, whereas I think Layla Moran had 5 other responsibilities previously and was quite hard to get hold of. Again, on education, I think we might have someone solely focusing on education in the Lib Dems. So yeah, we'll be down in Brighton trying to engage with them in September. And to be honest, I'm leaving the Tories to fight it out amongst themselves for a bit, really. I think they will be pretty happy tearing themselves apart, so probably don't need to go. Oh God, I think they're Birmingham this year, aren't they? So I'm probably going to leave them to fight it out for a bit before bothering to engage much. I think people like Andrew Griffiths and those who survive and George Freeman will probably be hoping for a nice select committee seat, but obviously there's going to be a lot fewer of those going around on the Tory side. So yeah, waiting to see really, but pretty much I'm just going to leave the Tories for the moment and focusing on engaging with new Lib Dems, I think.
Yeah, it makes sense for the Tories. Let the dust settle and see where they fall, because it's going to be a lot of sort of chaos and change and acrimony and all sorts of things going on there for the next probably 6 months to a year at least. And lots of councils, I understand, are sort of turned Lib Dem and Green. Is that right as well? So I don't know how many of you deal with local councils, but there's certainly a lot more sort of even more success there on the local level than at the national level.
It's probably quite a good point on the local level to think about the fact, how will the results from the general election pan out in local elections? So although Labour may have the levers of power in central government, when it comes to decisions at local level, are we going to see sort of an increase in reform councillors? Are they even going to be taking control of some councils, and how will that impact some of us? So definitely thinking about other parties is definitely worthwhile doing.
Yep. Okay. So someone asked for a summary of the King's speech. I don't think we need to do that because that's what all the news organizations does. Any other cutting questions? We've got about 15 minutes left if you guys want to stick around. I'm looking over the list here again. Anyone here, is it their first time dealing with the Labour government? There's quite a few people who said, yeah, okay. So so there's hopefully already been some new things for you about how they may work differently than the Conservatives. I think generally in terms of access, it's always been just a culture where the Conservatives have in general sort of offered less access than the Greens, Labour and Lib Dems. They've all Lib Dems have generally been the best for offering access, primarily because there's more of them than the Greens, but they're usually not in power. But it's it's certainly you should open doors, but don't expect that means you'll make faster progress.
Can I ask a question, Dwayne?
Of course you can.
Just interested about people. Have people noticed anything about relationships with civil servants that they speak to? Any kind of resetting of relationships or anything different they've noticed?
Yep, Mariam.
Turned out our main civil servant was actually on secondment and had been on for several years, and she's just been dragged away back to a different department. So it turns out everyone who was working on our issue actually didn't belong in that department, and now we've got no one. And I get the feeling that's happening to other people as well, where everyone's getting reset back to where they were. So they might have been in education for us, but actually they previously were in, DEFRA, and now they're back there now. So yeah, be interesting to see how the dust settles on that, because that's a lot of expertise that's getting lost.
Yeah, I wonder whether the Foreign Office as well will split off and sort of no longer have the it's a DFID. Sort of DFID will be recreated as its own entity, separate from the Foreign Office again, and that type of things that used to exist. There's a question here: how to get a policy win when your issue isn't high on the new government agenda? I think you need to get it high. I think you need to sort of find out. I think as Sophie and others were saying, I think you need to really work to find out who your allies and work with them to, when I was at Oxfam, often when we were contacting ministers, we'd tell people like, often, the minister just generally doesn't want to deal directly with members of the public. But the MPs do have access. So it's often like, ask your MP to talk to your minister about this type of thing. And if they get enough MPs talking to them, even if they're not Labour MPs, then they might be more willing to address something. But you certainly sort of got to do that work, and that's hard with the new government and lots of new MPs.
An old manager of mine used to use a method called the 5 barriers to change.
Oh.
And it's a test now to remember what they are, but if you Google Kirsty McNeil, she's actually now a new MP, but if you Google her and something like masterclass in advocacy, I think she talks through the 5 barriers to change in that, and that's really helpful. So like one example would be, okay, if vested interests are the barrier to change, then you need to use like PR as a method to like help hold those vested interests to accounts. Kirsty McNeil is spelled with 2 L's at the end.
2 L's. I'm not sure I can edit to post here. Let's see. There we go. I can edit. So, and actually she was on the ECF list as well, and may still be, although I don't expect her to be on there long before she sort of finds it a bit overwhelming. As well as Antonia Bantz, who's I think a junior minister at this point. So
I think one thing I'd say, one reflection, is that you need to be kind of, even if a campaign looks like it's so far off the agenda, like events happen, don't they? You know, the stock market changing in 2008, suddenly people are a bit more interested in a transaction tax internationally. So you get issues that have been bubbling away for sometimes decades, and then you get an opportunity where it's on the media agenda, it sort of becomes a political topic, and then actually you're ready to capitalize on all that work and evidence, and some policy people who've been beavering away on it for years. You just don't know what the opportunities will be. So there's a lot of unknowns, aren't there?
that is a really good point. And the example I always remember of that is the whole issue of dropping the debt, which was the Jubilee 2000 campaign, if you remember, in the 90s.
Yeah.
Which was about dropping the debt of the most heavily indebted countries. And one of the countries one of the conditions was to get your debt dropped as a country, you had to show you had low levels of corruption, which meant Haiti, which is the poorest country in the Western Hemisphere, was never eligible to get its debt dropped. And they had been hammering on about this for a decade plus. And all it took was I think it was the earthquake rather than the hurricane to come through and show how devastated sort of Haiti was, and a few calls in the newspaper, and sort of for people to say, yep, it's time to drop the debt. And it happened in literally a case of 2 days. But it took 10 years of campaigning to basically sort of get people ready for the fact that actually this is ridiculous, and sort of we need to, Haiti cannot rebuild, sort of, even if we drop the debt, so it's going to be tough for them. So, it's no sense keeping it. So absolutely be ready. And I do remember, if you go back even further, I think it was Christian Aid had a really good campaign around Afghanistan that was about to launch just before the September 11th attacks happened. And so once it happened, they pulled that forward to talk about Afghanistan and the important work that was happening there, and how to get sort of how they're working to get girls into education and all sorts of things. And I called them up and I said, how the hell did you get this out so fast? Because it's beautiful stories and beautiful photos and everything else. I was like, how did you do that? And they say, well, we were going to launch in two months and we just pulled it forward. So also I think, with events, absolutely be sort of ready to pull something forward you may have worked on partially, or may have worked on 5 years ago, and say, this is now relevant again. Pull it up there, but let's put it out. So that's a really good point. So lots of people having lunch in the background, presumably with the screens off. That's okay. Any final big burning questions you want to ask? And if you sort of don't want to ask it sort of with audio, you can always tap into the chat box. Let me just see if I missed anything. I'm doing both moderating and sort of watching these things. Oh, Lizzie, yes, thank you for posting that in there. Anything else? Okay. Any final hopes of sort of what this government may achieve, given the constraints and given what we know about how change happens and how fast it happens and everything else? I'm certainly hoping for some big movement on climate change. I would sort of love to see, sort of, I've seen some promising signs around that, although having looked at this issue over decades, sort of, I also know it's everything we do is too little, too late, which is not the most positive thing, but it's like, we got to do something still. But positive signs of mental health I saw. I think Mind was posting about that.
Just echo the hope for things in climate change, really, and that we'll be a world leader, inspiring others to do that. And yeah, we've had positive things so far. So yeah, really, really hopeful on that. Really bold moves from the government already on that. So yeah, finally, hopefully, something big on it.
It would be nice. It would be very nice. Good. Yeah, I mean, my feeling generally is that sort of it's nice to see the headlines not about squabbling over sort of all sorts of different issues and actually getting on with sort of governing rather than just sort of managing the reputations. I mean, if you remember the end of Labour, sort of they were at the same state sort of towards the end that sort of Conservatives were as well. So, but the hope is as much as they can achieve fast, then you know, hopefully we keep that locked in. I would love to see us rejoin the EU. That would be you know, that would be high on my list, but I don't think it's going to happen. At least going to happen for the next 5 years. Good. Okay, well, hopefully that was useful for everyone. Thank you very much for all of you who sort of were answering questions, contributing questions, making comments, things like that. Really, really helpful. I hope those of you who have the audio and video off also found the conversation useful and insightful as well. I've got a recording of this. Once again, if there's anything you've said that you don't think should be sort of left in there, I can always remove it. But the intent is that sort of I'll look at that and sort of edit it down and then sort of pop it out there so other people can benefit from as well, if that's okay with people. So super. Well, next week we have sort of Mike Harris from 89 Up, and he had talked to a whole bunch of MPs about sort of current, like people who are now MPs before they were sort of when they were running or when they were in the shadow government or whatever. And so he'll provide that sort of more nuanced one-to-one conversations he has, impressions. And I think he will try and bring an MP. I think we viewed it as a bit too ambitious to try and get an MP here this week, the day after the King's speech. So, but it was seen, it's sort of, unless I put these in the calendar 3-4 weeks ahead of time, sort of it needs that much time to sort of get people on their agenda and everything else. So it's hard to know what to put where and all that stuff. So good. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. Have a good rest of the week.
Thank you.